Welcome everybody to Kagyu Samizong Edinburgh for the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. Of course it's the Buddha's teaching, it's not my teaching, I'm simply relaying it. But it's a very good place to start because it is the first teaching of the Buddha. But before that, let us say the refuge prayer, which is, we'll say it once in English, and we'll say that once first, and then twice in the Tibetan phonetics, and that is so that we can make a good connection. Have you all got the one with the wheel on? Let me see yours. Gillian, can I just see? Oh yeah, it looks different from a distance. Okay. So we'll say first of all the English, so we know what we're saying, and then we'll say the Tibetan phonetics twice, so it's 3 times in all. And then there's a prayer underneath it, which we'll call the Four Immeasurables, which we'll say once in English and once in the Tibetan phonetics. And the last one, which is the dedication, we leave till the end of the session. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the noblest Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the virtue generated by the practice of generosity and other virtues, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Sanje cho chang suji cho nam la, chang chu padu dani chap sun chi, dagi jin suji pe sonam ji, Dola penche sanje rupar sho, sanje chotang suji chonam la, changchu padu dani chap sunji, dagi jin soji pe sonam ji, dola penche sanje rupar sho. May all beings be happy and create the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and from creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness that can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal, impartial compassion, free of bias to friends or enemies. Sem chen tam che dewa tang, dewe ju tang dempa ju chik, dunyao tang, dunyao chi ju tang trawa ju chik, dunyao mi pe dewa tang pa tang min trawa ju chik, niring cha dang tang trawe tang nyom chenpo la ne pa ju chik. Palden sawe lama rinpoche dagi chiwo pende de shukla katrin chempo goneji sumte kosunchachi ngurup sautu so. So that last prayer that I said by myself in Tibetan is the prayer to the Guru. So it can be the Buddha, it can be the head of the lineage, His Holiness Karmapa or His Holiness Dalai Lama, which depending on the lineage, or it can be one's root Lama, in my case Akam Rinpoche, or it can be the Lama whose teachings we're going to be looking at. So although we're looking at the teachings of the Buddha, the commentary that we're going to use, the explanation that we're going to use is by a very great Lama called Thrangu Rinpoche. And I put his I think, I don't know if you can see, it's quite a small photograph, but I put it on the shrine for because we're using his teachings. And I'm so glad that I found this, and I literally did find it. I was looking for something else in my bookshelf. I thought there was another teaching on it by somebody who I'm not familiar with, and I was looking for that, and I couldn't find it, but I found this, which I didn't know I had. So it just popped up. And Thrangu Rinpoche, he died quite recently, but he's an amazing person. And I had the good fortune to meet him many occasions, and also not that long ago, about a year ago, so just that was about a year before he died, in fact. But he's sort of started many centres, many monasteries, and this is a very, you can see it's very succinct, very concise exposition and explanation of the Four Noble Truths from his enlightened point of view, as a master of the Kagyu lineage and a teacher of the Karmapa, who is the head of the lineage, not only the present Karmapa but the one before. So he was a very unique position. I don't think there's anyone who can say that about, who has taught both Karmapas, because he lived till he was quite an old age. So I was overjoyed to find this, and really it's going to be extremely helpful. So when I was looking at it, I first of all thought, well, maybe we can teach this in one session. I don't think that's going to work. It's going to be at least 2 sessions, and possibly 3 or 4. I think probably 2 will be okay, because it gets progressively deeper. Now, you might think that because this is the first teaching of the Buddha, that it's some very sort of basic and easy and to understand, and, you know, sort of like doing your ABCs before you can do something else. That's not the case, and I think that's quite a misconception for a lot of people. Because it's the first one, you think it's the most sort of basic one. It is fundamental to all other teachings that follow. Without any understanding of this, your understanding of everything else will be extremely sketchy and not really have a good foundation. So that's why I wanted to revisit it, for my own sake as well as yours, you know, because it really bears looking into. And then also, you've got to remember that because it's the first teaching, it's the first one after he became enlightened. So you probably know something of the teaching of the Buddha, of how he became enlightened, and then, so what's he going to do with that enlightenment? How is he going to get across this huge, omniscient understanding of everything to ordinary people? And so the first people that he taught were actually at a really quite a high level anyway. They were the 5 ascetics that he'd studied with before he became enlightened. There were ascetics, and he was an ascetic while he lived with them. But they were barely eating anything. I mean, they were really, you know, sort of too extreme, basically. And that was one of the main things that he learned, was for the middle way, because, you know, you can't maintain even your physical strength, let alone your mental strength, if you're completely not getting enough nourishment. You know, we are, after all, in physical bodies. So after he became enlightened, he walked from Bodh Gaya, which is where he sat under the Bodhi tree, and he walked, which is quite some distance, to a place called Varanasi, and that's a holy place. Or it's also called, what's the other name for it? It's just gone out my head. Anyway, we call it Varanasi, and part of Varanasi there's this deer park, and that's where these ascetics were hanging out. So he approached them, and they saw him coming, and they could see that, wow, something has changed here. He was sort of glowing and looked different. They could see the difference, and so they were the first ones to receive his teachings. And on hearing the teachings, and he expounded them quite lengthily compared to this, they some of them reached, well, I think one of them reached enlightenment straight away, just on hearing it, and the others, it progressed them further, so they were almost ready. So, you know, because it's not like you're totally ignorant and then suddenly you're enlightened. It's a very progressive thing, and not just in one lifetime, over many lifetimes. It took the Buddha many lifetimes. We can't expect it. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but when you leave after this, the chances are you won't be enlightened, so you can forget about having that kind of expectation. But it's a step along the way. And so this is what we need to understand. And so without this, everything else will be a bit confused because you've not got this as a grounding. So it's so important. And if you have the level of intelligence and diligence and understanding and experience, then this could be the final lesson, not the first lesson, you see. So it depends on who's receiving it. Okay. So that's a little bit about the background of how this happened. Now we're going to explore the exposition of Thrangu Rinpoche. And before we start with the Four Noble Truths, we should also mention the view of the Four Noble Truths, the general view of the Four Noble Truths and the Two Truths, something that's called the Two Truths. So I'm going to just read this opening paragraph of the book. One needs to understand that when the Buddha taught, he was not teaching as a great scholar who wanted to demonstrate a particular philosophical point of view, or to teach for its own sake. The worldly teachers do teach like that, isn't it? If you go to university, that's what happens, basically. His desire was to present the very essence of the deep and vast teachings of Buddhism, what he'd come to understand through his enlightenment. And so for that reason, he gave teachings which suited the abilities of his disciples or whoever was in front of him that was asking him. And it could be the local road sweeper, it could be the university professor, it could be everybody in between, in different ages, excuse me. So he had to give them what would suit them and what would progress them along the path, which, because of his omniscience, he could intuit. He had that insight to be able to give them the correct teaching for them, and then it's theirs to work with. So all the teachings he gave, some were long and very detailed, some were short, some were very direct and appropriate response to the development of, all of them were appropriate to the development of the people who he was talking to, according to their capabilities. Of course, people have got very different capacities and different levels of understandings, and they also have different wishes and desires to learn and understand the Dharma, the truth. Dharma is the truth of things. Imagine you just got enlightened, you've gone out into the world, so you're not in like a formal setting where there's a class and they're all the same age and they've got roughly the same age. You're meeting people on the street, completely different to one another. So through his insight, he could ascertain what would be appropriate for them and at what level would progress them along the path. If the Buddha had taught only the very essence of his own understanding, i.e. total omniscience, I don't even know how you would do that, but he's the Buddha. If he would have taught that, those vast and far-reaching teachings, then apart from a very small number of people, high-level disciples who had great intelligence and diligence, few people would ever understand it. They would never understand the teachings of the Buddha. So the Buddha taught whatever would enable a person to develop, so he or she could progress gradually towards the very deep and vast teachings. In other words, he would set them on the path at the level that would best fit them, and they progress from there. So if we look at all his teachings as a whole, we can see that they fall into three main approaches or vehicles. The vehicles are called yanas. And the Buddha's teachings, they helped each student in a way appropriate for that level. And so because of that, one finds that on the relative level, each student received some benefit from what the Buddha taught. On the absolute level, one finds that all of the Buddha's teachings have the same goal. That's the two truths, by the way, the relative truth and the absolute truth. So we live in a very relative world. I'm relative to you, everything is relative. But that's not really how it is. So we're not at the level to fully understand the absolute truth, because that's not where we're at yet. So on the relative level, each teaching applied to each person would benefit them in some way, according to their capabilities. On an absolute level, one finds that all the teachings, they have the same goal. They're all going in the same direction. They're just from different starting points, you could say. And so when one analyzes the Buddha's teachings on the relative level, it seems like there are three levels, three vehicles, three yanas, three pathways, you could say. But if you look at them from the absolute level, they're all going in the same direction. But the paths are appropriate to people of different capabilities. So that's a sort of basic understanding. And so what are these three vehicles? You may have heard of them. They're called the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. So it's not that one is lesser and one is better or one is worse or it's according to the capabilities of the beings. So, for example, they're called the vehicles. So if you imagine, this is a bit of a worldly example I'm going to give here, a metaphor. It's strictly speaking, it's a metaphor, and it's not coming from Thrangu Rinpoche. But imagine you're going to buy a car, and it's your first car. You probably wouldn't want to jump straight into a Ferrari. Or imagine that you wanted to have a car that was not just for you, but for your family. You wouldn't want a sports car. You would want a big car that you could put your whole family in. And then, if you were capable of driving safely in a Ferrari, then you could have a Ferrari. So that's a worldly way of looking at something. So basically, the Hinayana is where we start. It is fundamental. But because it's the first one, the first teaching of the Wheel of Dharma, some people think, oh, that must be like for the beginners sort of thing. It kind of is, but we are all beginners. And it's nothing lesser about it. It means it's absolutely essential. But in some translations it's called the lesser vehicle or something like that, which makes it sound slightly derogatory. It's not. It's essential. And then we have the Mahayana, which has a sort of broader perspective. So it has the Bodhisattva vow, which includes the wish to benefit all beings. So that's like the family car. It's like you're not only thinking about yourself, you're thinking about others as well. So that's called Mahayana, which means the greater vehicle. And then the third one is the Vajrayana, which includes both of those. It's not something completely different. It includes the Hinayana and the Vajrayana and the Mahayana, but with a different method, a sort of fast track. Faster way, but it's only appropriate if you have a good understanding of the other two, and you are diligent and very keen intelligence, and you have the diligence to persevere and the skill and the experience, then that would be appropriate for you. So that's a very broad view. Okay, so these teachings, the Four Noble Truths, are the first yana, the Hinayana, or the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma. That's the other way of classifying the three levels: the first level, the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, second, third, fourth, in fact, as well. So the Four Noble Truths. Now we get to have a good look at this. So then, if the Buddha had taught the Four Noble Truths, if he taught his disciples principally by demonstrating his miraculous abilities and various powers, it would not have been the best way to establish them on the path. It might have impressed them. We do like to be impressed by these sort of miracles and things, and he would probably gather lots of people around. Oh wow, have you seen this teacher? He's amazing. He can fly. He can do this. He can do that. But he didn't do that. Some people have that approach, a bit like a showman or something. That was not his approach at all. It would not be the best way to establish people on the path. It would just impress them for 5 minutes, and it wouldn't actually affect them at all, other than they would be impressed. So, the best way to bring them to the wisdom on the path of liberation was to point out the truth, the very truth of things, and to point out the way things really are, as opposed to how we think they are, or how they may appear to us, because if you accept that we are at least partially confused some of the time, and very confused quite a bit of the time, and also we don't know we're confused, so then that makes it tricky, isn't it? So the Buddha is trying to show us how things truly are. Not just how they appear to us in this relative way of being. Things aren't what they seem to be. So, this is what he did. He showed the truth through the Four Noble Truths, and the truths, the two truths, the relative and absolute truths, when he went into that as well. And so by seeing the way things really are, the students, whoever was listening, the students learned how to eliminate their mistakes and delusions. So first of all, you have to become aware of them to know that you are deluded. so there's a lot of pointing out goes on. But you could say even, I'm not sure whether it's word eliminate, I think it's maybe more a way of, once you've seen through it, there's an understanding that happens. Like with anything, even on a worldly level, if you're trying to teach a child not to put their hand in the fire, they might not learn it, but when they put their hand in the fire, they will learn. Because through their experience. That's just a metaphor, but you see what I'm getting at here. So very often we're not aware of our own faults, or we're not aware of our own kind of how we're confused. So that's what. But once we do have some awareness of where we misunderstand something, and we understand something, then we've seen something, haven't we? We've progressed. We don't fall back into going back to what we thought before. Well, maybe that's possible as well. I don't know. It depends. If you have to sometimes consolidate things for a while, but usually, once you've seen something, then it changes the way you see things. So eliminating one's confusions or mistakes, delusions, automatically destroys the causes of one's suffering, because it's this that causes our suffering and hardships. And this allows one to progressively reach the state of liberation and great wisdom. We're imprisoned by our confusion. When we see through that, we've escaped. And that is why the Four Noble Truths and the Two Truths are the essence of the first teachings of the Buddha. In fact, all the other teachings depend on that understanding. They are essential. That's why they're the essence. So at best you can only kind of grasp little bits and pieces, but we need to get to the bottom of this. So this is why I'm just introducing it here, you know, and this will take time and study and reflection and meditation. And that's how you get to understand. That's what the ascetics did. Nothing happens by accident. You know, it's like when you're studying a worldly topic, you can't expect to just go to something and, oh yeah, that's how it is. You know, it's not like that. And this is harder because you're dealing with your own confusion, you know. So first of all, you need to see what that is. It's not easy. It sounds simple, but it is simple if you just say it, but it's not easy. It requires effort. You know, another kind of metaphor, I throw metaphors out a bit because maybe it helps to sort of get a handle on it, but imagine you're in a house and all the windows are dirty, but you just, that's all you know. You say you were born in that house, that's all you see is you're accustomed to the windows being dirty. That you wouldn't know a clean window because that's how they always are for you. So everything that you see through those windows is going to be somewhat distorted, isn't it? Because of the dust or the muck or whatever's on the windows. Everything is going to be not exactly how it should look. But we don't know that the windows are dirty because that's all we've ever known. It's something like that. So we're going to start cleaning windows, which you've already been doing, I'm sure. You know, you've not gone through life from being a child to now without having some kind of idea of where things you might not be totally perfect just yet, and you might have to make a few tweaks here and there. I'm being sarcastic. To me as well as you. Okay. So these are just metaphors, but maybe it kind of helps to understand a little bit. Okay, so let's look at the first noble truth. So the first noble truth is the full understanding of suffering. Now, if we go back to before the Buddha was enlightened, when he was still a prince living in the palace and everything was hunky-dory and he had everything he wanted, but then he got curious and he went out of the palace and for the first time he saw suffering, because within the palace, and it was more like a little city, you know, with everyone was beautiful, everyone had lovely clothes, they all had what they wanted, there was loads of food, everything you could want, and him especially, he had everything. So when he first went out of that environment into India, downtown India, you know, and saw people suffering and starving and dying and animals, dead animals, everything, it just must have really hit him, you know, and he just saw all this suffering on a grand scale for the first time, after never having seen any of it. Of course, this is his life as an example for us. And so when he went back to the palace, he could not pretend that he hadn't seen that. He couldn't forget that, no matter. He couldn't just go on living his life of Riley when he knew what was going on outside. And so that was the impetus for him to leave the palace, leave all that life of luxury and go and explore the world and see what was going on. And could he understand it? Why was all this suffering? Is it possible to get out of it? What's the score here? You know, are we landed with this forever, or is there some way of escaping this? So suffering, seeing suffering, was the very impetus that caused him to set out on the life of becoming the Buddha. Before that, he was a prince. So I think some people think Buddhists, they're always talking about suffering. You know, they must be so miserable. It's because we don't want to be miserable. We want to get out of the suffering. So in order to do that, we need to know what it is, why it is, how it is. We need to know about it. So we need to investigate it. So we don't need to be suffering. We just need to be curious and aware that we have to clean our windows, and so you have to, not just pretend that, no, they'll be fine. You know, so you never roll your sleeves up and get down to cleaning your windows. So, course, the first noble truth is the full understanding of suffering. So, of course, in an obvious way, people are aware of suffering. I mean, we know when we're suffering some of the time. We know the obvious ones, like if we're sick, or, we're in pain, or somebody bashes us over the head, or we might have mental suffering and emotional suffering. We know that. It feels painful. That's kind of called obvious suffering. Or when you might be hungry, you might be cold, you might be in a war-torn country. There's a million ways of suffering. No, many more. And so they're kind of easy to recognize that these are the things that one doesn't like. We definitely do not like these things, and we suffer if we're experiencing them. But the first noble truth includes awareness of all the ramifications of suffering, because it encompasses the very nature and essence of suffering, what actually is suffering. So yes, the obvious ones are when we experience what we don't like, whether physical, whether mental, whether emotional, we're aware of those. But there's a more subtle kind of suffering that we're not always aware of. So we're now going to look at the knowledge of the subtle suffering and the obvious suffering. The obvious one is obviously easier. So the obvious aspect of suffering is the immediate pain or difficulty that we might be in at that time. It doesn't last all the time. We might have a bad headache today, but we know it's not going to be forever. But subtle suffering is more difficult to understand. Why? Because it can feel like happiness. So imagine you're in a very nice situation, a very happy situation. Maybe you've got a nice house, you've got a nice partner, you've got the job of your dreams, all of these things. We're pretty happy with all that, and we're in good health. But, I'm sorry to load this on you, but there's a but. We also, if we look at it, we know that it's not going to last forever, because everything changes. What we like changes, and what we don't like changes, because it is the nature of life, it's impermanence. Everything is impermanent. Well, that's quite handy when you're going through something you don't like, because it's not going to last forever. But when you're going through something that you do like, I wish this moment could go on forever. But hey, it can't, So there's already a seed of suffering there, knowing that it's not going to last forever, whatever that is. And if we don't like it, that's a good thing, but if we do like it, it's a bad thing because we want it to go on forever. Yeah? You can relate to this? So, everything changes. That changes the nature of life. I mean, if you look at, we study the Four Foundations, and we talk about this aspect a lot, because if you think about even just physically, there isn't a single cell in your body that's the same as the cell that you had when you were born. You're not the same person. not physically the same person. Maybe there's some consciousness that carries on, but the physical body is completely changed. So because it must change into suffering, then subtle suffering is the non-permanence of pleasure. It doesn't last, whatever it is. So you could say that, most things, if you're thinking of it in a kind of attached way, a grasping sort of way, like I want it to last forever, then you're in for a big disappointment because it's not going to last forever. So we have to come to terms with this reality, otherwise we're going to be disappointed all our lives. And we don't want to be. We want to get out of the suffering. So not. It's through the expectation that it's going to last all forever, the good things are going to last forever, then you're sowing the seed of disappointment, aren't you? Because it ain't going to happen. So what is happiness? It can often, by its very nature, mean that there will be suffering later on, if you have that expectation of it, for it to last forever. There is no worldly happiness that lasts for a long time. Worldly happiness includes an element of change. So you could sort of say that that's kind of built-in suffering. It has that seed of suffering. Life, the very fact of being born, has that seed of death, isn't it? There's nobody born that is not going to die. How long it takes is debatable, but the fact that when you're born, you are going to die is not negotiable. So for that reason, the first noble truth of the awareness of suffering refers not just to the immediate and obvious suffering, but also the subtle elements of suffering. So the Buddha taught the truth of suffering because everything that takes place on a worldly level is a form of suffering, either obvious or subtle. He's trying to get to the bottom of things here. So it's not that he's just delving into the suffering because he likes being miserable. It's not. It's about wanting to get out of it, and to do that you need to understand it. What's going on here? So, if you look at when we suffer, but we're not aware of it, we don't even know that, we're not aware of it because we think we're sort of relatively okay, but we're not aware of the potential suffering that's down the line, then we don't have the motivation to eliminate the suffering. So we're stuck, going round and round in samsara, in worldly life. So and then we'll continue to suffer because we've not learned anything about it and how to get out of it and how to become liberated from it. We just stay stuck in that, going round and round, and sometimes we're having a nice time, sometimes we're not having a nice time, and it's round and round and round. So when one is aware of suffering, one is then in a position to overcome it. Or you could say transform it. But we have to know it first. We have to be aware. We have to take the blindfold off, the Walt Disney blindfold, that was the Fairyland, La La Land blindfold, that we get fed. We get fed that a lot, don't we? That's how most things are sold to us. But it's not to enlighten us. They sell us that view, because usually to make money, make money out of us. So we get fed all this sort of fairy tale stuff. To be controlled, to be consumers. It's usually the motivation of it. There's probably other motivations as well, but it's not actually like that. So we've got to look at, it's like, when you're doing the housework, you have to get down and dirty for a bit, And so that's not just, if I close my eyes, I'll pretend it's really nice and clean, which is kind of how we're fooling ourselves and we're being fooled. So this is all about shaking off those veils of ignorance, really. So when one is aware of suffering, one is able to overcome it. And so with the more subtle forms of suffering, if one is happy and becomes aware that happiness automatically includes the seed of suffering, so you have that awareness that, okay, I'm happy now, but it isn't going to last forever, so I know that. Doesn't mean to say you have to be then unhappy. Enjoy it while it lasts, why not? But we'll be much less inclined to become involved to the attachment to that happiness, and it's the attachment that causes the suffering, not the happiness. Enjoy the good things that life brings you. Why wouldn't you? But if you're attached to it, you're grasping it, you want it to stay there where you can see it and have it forever, that's where the suffering lies. You reckon? Can you see that? Yeah. So it's not the happiness is not a problem, happiness. It's good, it's nice, why not? attachment is where we fall down. Whether it's to things, I love this thing, I'm going to keep it forever, don't ever touch this because this is mine, you know, or he is mine, or she is mine, or that, all that stuff, you know. That's where the suffering is, not the thing or the person themselves. So, if you're less inclined to become involved with the attachment, one will then think, okay, this seems to be happiness. It is, I am feeling happy right now, but there is built-in suffering, there is impermanence. And so then we'll want to, knowing that, we want to dissociate, we let go. We still can experience the happiness, but we let go of the grasping. But first, in order to do that, we really need to understand it, because through force of habit, we'll want to keep it. Because all our life, and maybe many lives before, that's what we've been told, that's how we've been, and we grasp things. So we need to teach ourselves. We're in touch with our inner Buddha here. So when we see it, that is indeed the case, then we'll want to loosen that attachment, disassociate ourselves from that wrong view, essentially. Even if it takes a while, you know, we'll catch ourselves and, oh no, don't care too much about that, you're welcome to it, sort of thing. But but that one, no, don't take that one. You know? So we find ourselves doing this all the time. And every time we see ourselves doing it, we can either ignore it, or we can take it as part of our learning process and move on and keep progressing. Or we can ignore it and go nowhere, get stuck. So then one will want to dissociate. So the first truth is that one should be, first of all, aware of suffering. And once one has a clear picture of the nature of suffering, one can really begin to avoid that suffering. Because we don't get caught up in that same way. You know, it's like a little bell, a little warning bell. Oh. Obviously, the obvious ones are the obvious ones, they're not too much of a problem, but the ones that we get kind of hooked into. I mean, you could take a very kind of drastic example and say that that's how people get hooked on drugs, isn't it? First time, well, this feels quite nice, this is quite good. And then, you know, then you get hooked on that way. And anyway, that's just an example, but it's a bit like that. So we need to be aware. Of course, everyone wants to avoid suffering and to emerge from suffering, but to accomplish that, we need to be very clear about its nature. We need to understand it. Then when we have a clear view, it's like we've cleaned the window. Ah, that's how it is. Okay, so I can still enjoy life and the good things, but, you know, just don't get too attached. Don't grasp. So when one becomes aware that the nature of day-to-day existence is suffering, we don't have to be miserable with the thought suffering will always be present. Suffering doesn't go on forever because the Buddha entered the world, gave the teachings, and demonstrated clearly what suffering is. So we're very, very lucky because the Buddha did do that. And he showed it very clearly with his own life. You know, he had, when he was a prince, before he was the Buddha, he had what most people would aspire to, they would kill for, to have everything that you could possibly want. So, and the fact that he wanted to see what was going on the outside and saw that suffering and saw had some inkling of how widespread it was, that's why we've got these teachings, you know. His whole life was an example to us, which means we've got a blueprint. We're not blind, we have a map. So suffering doesn't need to go on forever if we understand what the Buddha taught. He demonstrated very clearly and he also taught the means by which suffering can be ended. And he described the state beyond suffering, which is liberation. That is freedom. You know, we talk about freedom, about getting out of jail or getting out of a bad relationship and all of that, and that is that kind of freedom. But to be free of the absolute confusion that we've been in for not just this lifetime, but many others. Not the word absolute should not be used there, but very integral, part of how we've been living our lives. Then it doesn't have to be like that. There is a way out, and the Buddha showed us that. And many others have showed us that as well, since that time. So he already taught that we don't have to enjoy it, and we can in fact be happy. Even though one cannot immediately emerge from suffering by practicing the Buddha's teachings, we can gradually eliminate suffering, and in this way we move towards eventual liberation. So it's not like, oh, we're suffering, oh, we're not suffering. It's a gradual process. And we can teach ourselves, once we become aware enough even to just investigate it. Is this true? This is what we all need to think. Is this woman talking nonsense? What is this book? How do I know what the Buddha was right? You need to know for yourself. But you need to have at least enough kind of trust or curiosity to look into it and to identify within yourself, in your own life, and just see how's it working in my life? Never mind the Buddha's life. How's it going in my life? Why do I suffer? And look at it from this point of view, to be aware of it. When you're aware of it, you're in the driving seat. You're not a victim of it. It's when we don't know what's going on that we're the victim, isn't it? We can't help ourselves. We're not in a position of power to do much about it. So by becoming aware of it, it's not to make ourselves miserable, quite the opposite. It's to get out of that state. But first we need to look into it and continue looking into it and apply it. And when we apply it, we see how it works. And that then gives you more trust. And you apply it a bit more, and you see how that works. And that's when you begin to have faith, because you can see for yourself, not just because someone's telling you something or you're reading something, but you see how it works. But that's down to you. This is just a morning we're having together, a session, and presentation of the Buddha's teaching, and Thrangu Rinpoche's really valuable insight into it, and what you do with it is up to you. So the fact that one can gradually eliminate suffering in this way and move towards eventual liberation, that fact in itself can make one very happy, because you're starting to see how it works. Yes. That's not to say it's all plain sailing from that point in. There'll be ups and downs, there'll be, you've got habitual things, we've got habitual ways of behaving that take a bit of elbow grease, let's say. But applying the Buddha's teachings, we can be happy even before one has actually completely emerged from suffering. While we're on that path and we see that it's working, that is in itself is a cause of joy. You see it's working. I'm saying that. It's up to you to see it for yourself. I could be saying any old thing. I'm not, but you need to test it for yourself. Applying of the Buddha's teachings, one can be both happy in the relative phase of our life, where we're at now, and of one's progress, and then at the end we'll gain wisdom and liberation and be happy in the ultimate self as well. In fact, we will be Buddha. At that point we will be Buddha. That's where the direction we're going in. In fact, we already are Buddha, potentially. It's not that you have to do something, change something. What has to happen is that you have to clear the obstacles away. And then who you truly are becomes emergent. So it's not a question of putting something in that wasn't there. We already have it, but it's like having a jewel that is hidden. You know, it's under layers of whatever. So we're slowly starting to take those layers off, and woo! And it can take many lifetimes, so please don't have too much expectation on this process, because then you'll be disappointed, and that's not what we're trying to avoid here. So we have to be realistic. But the good news is it depends on us. It's not somebody out that's holding you back or something like that, or punishing you, or, you know, it's down to us. And the fact that you're all here today, there's a reason for that. That's not happened by accident, you know? So that's one thing to be happy about, I think. So the first noble truth makes it clear that there is suffering. This is the first one. And once one knows what suffering is, one can eliminate that suffering. One can see through that suffering. We no longer suffer because we've seen through it. It's not a question of eliminating the suffering itself, but of eliminating the causes of suffering. Once one removes the causes of suffering, then automatically the effect, which is suffering, is no longer present. And that will bring us on to the second noble truth. But I think that first noble truth for now, let's just sit with that for a bit, because it's a lot to digest. And then we'll have maybe 10 minutes or something like that, just a short sitting. So you can call it meditation, you can call it sitting, you can call it whatever you want. But I think we should just call it, get yourself in a good posture. So it's okay to be on a chair, but you do need to come forward on the chair so that you're not leaning on the back of it, and plant your feet flat on the ground, shoulder width apart. And then whether you're on the floor or on a chair, you definitely need to have a straight back, properly straight, not in a stiff way. You see that cupola, that light source above us? So without looking up, but imagine the top of your head like the crown of a tree, and imagine reaching up to the light, and then your back will become straight in a more holistic way. Just imagine you're stretching up to that light. So instead of being like that, and keep your eyes open, instead of being like that, you're like that. And the chin slightly tucked in, just slightly tucked in. So not stiff. Relax your arms. You can either have them resting near your knees or in your lap. The only problem if you're in a chair is that the arms get a bit in the way. And so if you're sitting on the floor, you can also have that position. Keep your eyes open, not sleepy time. So I would say with your hands on your knees. Is that okay? If you don't have arms of the chair, then you can try this position with your hands in your lap, with the right hand on top of the left, both palms upwards. Either one is good. And if you're in this position, then just, again, the arms are a little bit curved. Relax your shoulders, drop the shoulders completely. That one as well. Yeah, that's where you got the tension, I can see. Okay, good. So either way is fine. And then keeping the eyes slightly open, just rest the eyes looking downwards, but then forget about looking, because we're not going to be looking at whatever's in front of us. We're going to be keeping the eyes open so we don't get sleepy, you might want to take your glasses off if you don't mind, because you're not going to be looking at anything in particular. What you're going to be looking at is more your mind, and that's inward. So you switch the focus from engaging with the outside world to looking at your inner landscape. So we'll just relax body and mind while maintaining a good posture. So when I say relax, that doesn't mean slump. It means keep a good posture. Why? Because when you want to sit and meditate and be clear, then it really helps to have everything physical in place as well as mental. It will help the energy, and it will help your mental and physical together. So we do need to have a straight back, but not in a stiff way. Just imagine you're growing up towards the light, and it takes the weight off the hips, so it allows you to be comfortable for longer. So just relaxing the face, all the muscles in the face, and the head generally, the back of the head, the jaw and the neck. Feel it all soften, all the muscles in the face soften. If you allow your lips to be very slightly apart, you'll find that automatically softens the jaw. Relaxing along the arms, down all the way to the fingertips. Breathing normally through the nose, but with a bit more attention, a bit more focus. You notice the air coming into the lungs, and then the diaphragm, also the belly. Allow the belly to move, to expand and fill with each in-breath, and to let go of the out-breath fully. So you're using your whole body, and that in itself will help your body to settle, your mind to settle, because the mind and the body are obviously connected, especially by the breathing. So when we breathe fully, all the way down into the belly, allowing it to fill and empty with each breath, that is the most natural way to breathe, the most healthy way to breathe. It's the shallow breathing when we get stressed that's not so good. So you can try to remember to breathe the whole body, not just when you're sitting meditating, but all through your life. It'll be very grounding. And you'll find the mind also slows down. And just resting the body and mind together, fully present, in the present, fully aware. And just allowing your mind to rest and contemplate from time to time what we've been talking about. The first of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. Have a think about it yourself. See how it applies in your life. And if you start to get a bit too tight with it, then just relax again. You can alternate between contemplating and just sitting. So it's important to look at these truths in the light of your own life. Recall when you suffer, what makes you suffer, whether it's obvious, and also the more subtle aspects of why you might suffer. Is it true that one can lessen the suffering by lessening the grasping? And is there some relief in that? Okay, so that's quite short, but because we want to carry on a bit more, but you know, when you're sitting yourself, you can sit for a lot longer and look into it in more depth, but just to give you a taste of it while it's still fresh in your mind. So, basically, we've come to this sort of conclusion that once one eliminates the causes of suffering, that's what's going to set us free. So once one removes the causes of suffering, then the automatic effect, which is suffering, is no longer present. So now we need to look at what is the cause. We've acknowledged that we do suffer, and in ways that we didn't maybe think of as suffering before. So then now we need to look at the cause. And that's why, in order to eliminate this suffering, one becomes aware of the second noble truth, which is the truth of universal origination, how this happens, how the cycle starts and carries on. The cause, basically. So that is actually the way to work with these truths, with these any teachings, is to, take them on board, but then sit with them, think about them, contemplate them, relax with them, just look into them, and then really the most important thing is to apply them in your own life. That's what we're working on ourselves. We're not working to pass an exam. We won't get a qualification at the end. We'll just become liberated. Just that small thing. We'll become Buddha. So it's better than passing an exam, isn't it? But it might take some time. Okay. So I had a brief look at the first noble truth, and then that has already segued into the second noble truth, which is the causes of suffering. We won't spend too long on this, because it's something for you to look into, but in brief, it's called the truth of universal origination, or cause. That's an English translation of the name the Buddha gave to this noble truth. It means that which is the cause or origin of absolutely everything. You might have seen the wheel of origination, which is kind of just goes round in a circle, which is a visual interpretation of samsara. Samsara means worldly life, the cause and effect of worldly life, and its nature of suffering. It's implicit suffering. So, the truth of universal origination indicates that the root cause of suffering is karma and the kleshas. So we need to know what those words mean. So they're Sanskrit words. So karma means actions. Actions. It does not mean punishment or anything like that. It means actions. What we do. And what we do is a result of how we think, isn't it? We don't just act like your body. If I'm thirsty, you have to think I'm thirsty first, and then you pick up the cup or whatever it is. Your mind is telling your body what to do, and then the body acts as a result of the way we think or feel. And the kleshas are the obscurations, you could say, the defilements, the mental poison, the dirts on the window, our wrong way of seeing, our confused way of seeing, let's say. Because we don't know, because we're sort of a bit in the dark, we're not fully switched on. So we have mistaken ways of seeing things, confused ways of seeing things, and that's what distorts our understanding of how things truly are. And all the Buddha's teachings is to get to the root of that and to clear the way, to clear the way of obstacles. So get rid of those obstacles. They are not part of your intrinsic nature. That's not who you are. That's like the dirt on the windows. It's stuff that's landed on you kind of from misunderstanding. Your true nature is Buddha nature. So we need to clear the debris that's landed on us, the emotional debris and mental debris. So the mental defilements. So if one does not understand the Buddha's teachings, one would most likely attribute all happiness and suffering to some external causes. Oh, it's because this happened. Oh, it's because that happened. Oh, it's because she said that, or I did this, or they did that, or I was born there, or, we always blame something on the outside. And one might think that happiness and suffering come from the environment. Oh, it's because I live in this place, or that's why I'm not happy, or I am happy. Or if we really look at that, that's not the case. Otherwise, somebody that lives in what we would think of as a really good environment would be automatically happy. But they're not, are they? Very rich people live in wonderful houses and palaces and whatever, and they're really not happy. Or they might be happy, but it's certainly not dependent on that. Also, I remember seeing a lovely film about Indian slums. I don't know which city, probably Mumbai or somewhere, I don't know where it was, but anyway, some slums. And these kids that were playing there, so happy, just really, really happy. You could see it in their faces. They were so happy playing in the dirt, whatever they were doing. And unfortunately, I read somewhere recently that nowadays the children in the UK are sort of the bottom of the happiness league. They're kind of really not in a good place. It's very sad. So it shows you that it's not dependent on how rich you are or external environment. There may be some effect from that, but that's not the essence of it. So, or you could think that it comes from the gods, and that they're punishing you, or the god or the gods, or whichever religion you're in, that somehow punishing you for being a bad person or rewarding you for being a good person, and that everything's outside of your control. You might be rewarded or punished. A lot of people think like this. So that's when we think that we attribute it to some source outside of our own control. So if one believes this, then it's very hard, if not impossible, to eliminate the suffering and its causes, because we're not taking any responsibility for it. It's all their fault, that's fault, outside of ourselves. On the other hand, when one realizes that the experience of suffering is a product of what one has done, that is a result of one's karma, one's actions, then eliminating suffering becomes possible. We can't eliminate our past actions. They're in the past, that's already happened. But with understanding, we can learn from that and not act in negative ways that causes more suffering. But we may not know that the ways are negative. That's because we're confused. We may think it's all right. So we're in the process of learning here. And so that is in itself a reason to rejoice, because you're not at the mercy or whim of somebody else or some outside force. It's within our grasp to be able to affect our present and our future. Even our past, we can learn from it, so it can become useful. Instead of being like, oh, way down, but see, okay, so that's how that happened. And then it's not a pain anymore. Then it becomes something actually quite helpful. And the more you do that, the more you can say, okay, I get that, okay. And then, you progress from there, and there'll be other things, and you'll trip up sometimes, and out of force of habit, you'll forget certain things, but you're beyond the path to correcting what needs to be corrected in order to remove those obstacles. You are now in the driving seat. It's not some unseen force that's going to reward you or punish you or any of that stuff. You do it all by yourself, actually. Of course, there's outside circumstances and everything, but this is the key to it. How you respond. You can't change the world, but you can change how you are and your experience of it. You open your mind, you reveal understanding that you didn't have before, and that changes Even though maybe something hasn't particularly changed on the outside, you still live in the same house, you're still in the same relationship, all of that stuff. But how you see it. And then, of course, because of how you see it, because your understanding, that changes how you act. That is your karma, your actions. So from this point on, that will change because you've had some light of understanding. I'm not saying it's going to be unmistaken, but it will be less mistaken. The chances of it being unmistaken are more because you've understood something and you can see the direction in which you're traveling. Not just sort of getting lost in the one-way system around, thanks to the trams that now exist. Hey, you can't go where you want to go, so you've got to go all the way around. And that is actually a very good metaphor for samsara, just getting lost, going round and round, and you see the same people driving and becoming ghosts and things. That's Leith, by the way. Anyone listening over... abroad somewhere, wherever, we're talking about a one-way system in Leith, which is a little bit confusing. But once we understand it, we can escape it. Now we're aware of it. Okay, so eliminating the suffering then becomes possible because of how you're seeing. So once one is aware of how suffering takes place, then one can begin to remove the causes. But first one must realize that what one experiences is not dependent on external forces, but on what one has done previously. So, whatever you did previously in your life, whether this life or past lives, has brought you here now. You didn't come by accident. Nobody told you to come. You heard about something, you thought, oh, okay, I'll go there. You went there, you didn't do something else. You know, and this happens down to you. Of course, down to me a bit as well, because I'm presenting it, but you chose. Nobody railroaded you into coming. This is already a good action, I would say. I mean, we'll remain to be seen how useful it becomes, but that's positive karma. And that only arises because of past actions. Past actions have brought you to this place at this time, whatever happens. So, it's not accidental. This is the understanding of karma. Karma produces suffering and is driven by the defilements. So if you're acting from a defiled or very confused point of view, then those actions will result in negative results. Isn't it? You start from a negative, confused point of view. It's not that you want to do something negative, but because of your confusion, that's the way it works out. And so then you act in that negative way. The reverse is also true. If you act from an aware point of view and you act in a positive point of view, then the result will be positive. It's not about punishing or somebody judging you or anything. It's a law, like gravity is a law of gravity. You know, karma is unmistaken. It's very complex and very profound, and we're not going to delve massively into it right now, but the broad understanding is that positive actions produce positive results. Positive thinking produces positive results. Positive in terms of positive actions, and that then bears positive fruits. If you plant a tomato seed and you give it a bit of water and the sun comes down, you will get a tomato plant. You won't get deadly nightshade. Okay, so a very simple way of understanding an extremely vast subject, but that's broadly what happens. So the term defilement, it really refers to any negative motivation and negative thoughts which produce negative actions. So you might have, for example, a negative thought about somebody, or you know, oh, I don't like that one, you know. Do you know what? I'm not. Like, for example, say you're giving stuff out, but you really don't like that person. She doesn't even deserve it. So you just ignore that person and you give it all out to everybody but that person. I mean, that's a very childish way of understanding things. But, you know, you might have some way of just, like, not being very nice to somebody because of maybe it had a good reason to be not very nice, but it's not very skillful to act in that way because it's only going to perpetuate. You don't have to descend into that way of behaving, into also being negative. Maybe if somebody's been negative to you, it doesn't mean to say you have to. That's the way arguments start. It's also the way wars start on a large scale. And it doesn't end as long as the ignorance is perpetuating those negative actions. Then you will get negative results. We don't have to look very far to see that on a world scale or in our own life. When we're having an argument and it just, you know, perpetuates it. And once we really see that, then we have the wish to get off that treadmill, you know, that endless cycle of negativity, of negative results coming from the same actions and the same thinking all the time. So when we cast some light on it and we have a different understanding, everything opens up. Possibilities don't have to be that way. We're now in the driving seat. We're not on the wheel anymore, like hamsters just going round and round. You know, we can affect it by stepping back and looking what's actually going on here. So basically, the suffering that we experience and we looked into in the first Noble Truth is because of the cause of the suffering. It doesn't happen randomly, and we have responsibility for the cause, and we can change that. We change the way our mind can see, you know, we become more aware, and through that awareness, our actions will automatically change. But as a result of that, it's bound to happen. Of course, you need to put some effort into it. Just like, just wait for them to get a bit more aware, and then it'll all be hunky-dory. we have to really look into it and see for ourselves. Okay. So I think just to briefly tell you that the motivation that we have is very, very important. What our motivation is. If our motivation is good, positive, altruistic, helpful, not just good in the sense of I want this, but what would be the best for others, you know? If we have selfless motivation, then the actions will be good, then the results will be good, and we will be happier. So it's a win-win. When we use the word defilement, it means the negative motivation, negative thoughts, which produce negative actions, and that's where the problems are. And so what are they? They are ignorance. We don't know, or we refuse to know. Attachment, too much attachment to whatever, to grasping. Aversion, which is its opposite. So I want this, but I don't want that. I like this, I hate that. You know? So that's attachment and aversion. And then there are all the subdivisions of jealousy and pride and greed and all of that stuff, but they come from those three root causes: the ignorance, attachment, aversion. So we can examine when we do something, what's our motivation? You know? And if our motivation is good, it comes from good understanding, awareness, then we're motivated to act in a way which will produce good results, positive results, and we will be happy because of it. Because we're not going out with motivation, I want to be happy. There's the I in it straight away. Never mind everyone else. I want to be happy. That is not going to produce happiness or good results for anybody. But when we have a less selfish motivation, when we think of others, when we think of, well, what would be a good thing to do here in this situation? Take the I out of it, that reactive I, that, well, she did this to me, so I'm going to do that to her. That's like kids in the playground. I often think of that when I look at the politicians. And myself, of course. So that's when we can easily fall into that, habit. We've been doing it for many lifetimes. So we'd be brave now and see who we can truly be. We can truly be Buddha. And on that note, let's make the dedication prayer. So at the bottom of the page, we'll say it in English, and then we'll say the Tibetan phonetics. Through the wholesomeness of this practice, may all mental defilements be overcome, and may all beings be liberated from the ocean of samsara, stirred by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. O sanam de tamche zikpani, topne nyepe dranam pamchene, jiganachi bala drukpai, sipe sole doa doa sho. Okay, so we're sort of halfway through the Four Noble Truths. We've had a look at the first two. The next two, the third and fourth Noble Truths, are quite meaty. So it's either going to take one more session or it might take two more sessions, because there's a lot to understand. However, I do think that with the first session, we had to go really into the beginning of it, and that takes some time before we even got to looking at the First Noble Truth. So I don't know if it will take one more session or two more sessions, and I'm not going to make that decision now. It depends on how the next session goes, and I hope you'll come to it. I doubt whether it's going to be in October, because we're almost in October now, and there's quite a lot happening this coming month. So if it isn't in October, it'll be at the beginning of November. But anyway, it's been good meeting you and talking to you, and I hope that it's been useful in some way. I can see that you're attentive, and that makes it a whole lot easier for me. So thank you for that, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you.